Patrick James Lynch is a filmmaker, media professional, and globally recognized health advocate who has delivered more than 100 presentations all around the world. He's been recognized with the Hemophilia Federation of America's Health and Wellness Award and the National Hemophilia Foundation's Meritorious Service Award in 2014, was a featured speaker during World Federation of Hemophilia's World Congress in 2016 and 2018, is an executive producer of Save One Life's 2020 content campaigns, has served as founding board president of the nonprofit Entertainment to Affect Change, and since 2011 has been the CEO of Believe Limited. His work has been featured by Backstage, BuzzFeed, Forbes, Fox News, HemAware, Hemophilia News Today, Huffington Post, PBS, Reuters, VoyageLA, and elsewhere.
I'm not the house of cards that falls down easily. I'm strong enough to handle what you throw at me.
Welcome to Mental Health News Radio. I'm your host, Kristin Sunanta Walker. Just what are we going to discuss? The intimacy that is mental health. Let's continue to make it as comfortable as discussing brain health or heart health. This show has been on the air for several years and we have amazing co-hosts. And then we created a network of podcasters on mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com, a place where every possible facet of mental well-being can be talked about openly. My show, after several hundred interviews, the format is this: intimate, deep, funny, touching, sometimes uncomfortable, but always vulnerable conversations with interesting people. The goal is to have you, our listening family, many of you who have become my good friends, feel as though you are listening in on private conversations. Thank you for tuning in and becoming part of this amazing journey with me, and now with our network of podcasters. Just knowing this podcast might be helping any of you realize you are not alone on this journey called being a human being makes doing this podcast worth every second.
After all we promised, we'd be cordial.
Patrick, welcome to Mental Health News Radio. I'm so glad we got on the phone the other day, and I'm really excited to get to have you on and talk about the many, many things that you do in the world.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's been good to connect with you through this otherwise quite isolating time. Good to make a new connection.
Exactly. So I know one company very well in terms of I've done my research, which is Believe Limited, but I know you do many other things and a lot of advocacy work. So do you just mind sharing with my listeners a little bit about who you are and what it is you're all involved in?
Sure. So I am a filmmaker, media professional, and health advocate. I live with severe hemophilia A. And the short story is a little over 10 years ago, my younger brother, who also had hemophilia, passed away from complications related to hemophilia. And that spurred me to want to use my skills as an actor and producer and writer in New York at the time to fill what I saw as a white space. People like my brother who were not connecting to their disease state because there was not outreach curtailed for a dynamic teenager in the late aughts, the 2010s, now 2020. So I started this company, Believe Limited, with my co-founder, filmmaker Ryan Gielen, with the mission to create entertainment to affect change. We wanted to explicitly create web series, podcasts, web videos, short films, feature films, live events, any kind and form of content where we could affect change and build community. We started within the bleeding disorders community. We still work very heavily within the bleeding disorders community. I have spoken at national and international events for some of the biggest conferences. Believe Limited has worked with all of the major nonprofits and companies in the space on various projects. And we've started to expand to work with other rare and chronic health conditions and using our entertainment forward approach to try to, again, build community and affect change.
Why did this medium speak to you, and how young or old, however you look at it, were you when you really realized, this is a medium that I really want to be a part of?
Yeah, it's a good question because I came from theater and I was born in New York. I went to theater school in Boston to BU's School of Theater, and then back to New York where it was off Broadway, Broadway commercials, a very different kind of um, entertainment experience than that which I've actually built my company on. So it wasn't until I connected with my partner, Ryan Gielen, who I met as an actor in a silly little web commercial that he was producing and directing. But, it's a testament to why you just show up every day, because while that
Right.
commercial was ridiculous and barely paid, literally, I think there was like a $5 bill and a Metro card in a white envelope that I got when I showed up to Central Park for this silly little thing. So when I say it didn't pay, it really didn't. But I met this guy and I thought he's interesting. And we kept in touch. And when I had the idea to create a comedic web series about bleeding disorders, that idea was born out of I want to use comedy. I want to use comedy as a tool to reach people. I know it's effective, and there are all kinds of studies to support that. I can point to those when I go seek funding. I want to use comedy. But I know theater. I didn't know about cameras. I didn't know about film, but I knew I wanted what I made to be permanent. One of my it's like the double-edged sword of theater. Its temperance is so beautiful. It's part of the magic, but also when it's done, it is done. And I think because my brother left and my brother was gone, and I was trying to do something that would help other people like him connect to their disease state, I didn't want that thing to be temporal. I wanted it to stick around. So I engaged Ryan, talked to him about this concept I had for a show that would be like The Office, except set in a hemophilia nonprofit organization, just run by this ragtag group of wannabe advocates. Thought that would be producible, easier to produce something like that, cheaper to produce something like that than something that's a more traditional narrative. And I knew it would mean we'd constantly be breaking the fourth wall. So I, as a person with hemophilia and this world of fictional doctors and nurses and advocates, could speak directly to the young people and young parents that we've picked up along the way who were watching our show. So it made sense to not only go to the web and go to web series, but specifically using that mockumentary, that fake documentary approach to make it feel real and to try to blur that line a little bit between reality and art.
So any listeners that don't know about hemophilia, can you give the very, the high level? And I know that's a big ask because I'm sure there are so many varying
No, I'll try to keep
mind
it
in that.
simple. Yeah, it gets complicated very quickly, but the shortest story, there are 13 proteins that are involved in the clotting process when a blood vessel bursts. So a vein, an artery, even a tiny little capillary. And of these 13 proteins, there are two that can most commonly be absent and cause dysfunction, either the eighth or the ninth in what is sort of a sequence. It doesn't exactly go like dominoes, but kinda. But the most important piece is if you're missing one, it corrupts the whole process. So if you're missing the factor 8 protein, which is what I'm missing, you have classic hemophilia. Congratulations, hemophilia A. And if you're missing the factor 9 protein, you have hemophilia B, also known as Christmas disease. Nothing to do with the holiday, but a doctor named Christmas who was relevant to hemophilia B.
Okay. What is something that you have to be more careful of having this than someone who doesn't?
So I take medication intravenously through my veins multiple times a week to keep my factor levels, as they're called, up. The protein is also called factor. So I have to regularly take that so that I can, by and large, function in life like a normal person. The ways in which I'm still very different than a normal person, I've done damage to my ankles and my knees. Weight-bearing joints tend to be the most compromised for people with hemophilia because they are weight-bearing, and those tend to be the joints that wind up with the most pressure and the most problems. And then looking out for head injuries, chest injuries. So for example, what happened to my brother is he sustained a minor head bump that he didn't think much of, didn't treat, and he went to bed and never woke up. So head injuries, chest injuries, those can be really serious. Otherwise, so long as I and people like me are taking their medication on this proactive, prophylactic regimen, I'm pretty well covered. I live a really normal life. I just got to be careful of my already corrupted ankles and knees and be mindful of my head and heart. in more ways than one.
Right. And we all need to do that anyway, regardless of whatever anyone's got going on with them. But I think
True.
one of the things that I immediately went, oh my gosh, how it's so amazing. Like you said about your partner in Believe Limited, that opportunity that shows up out of something silly, maybe
Yes.
not, but something that you don't think, you don't necessarily think, oh, something's going to come out of it. And I felt that when you and I connected, um, because one of my, if not my best friend growing up, had hemophilia, and I'm 50. So way back before all the breakthroughs and what you've
Yeah.
experienced.
Yeah. Much
Uh,
different era.
a much different era. It was, he had to be bandaged up kind of like a mummy in many ways, and we had to keep him from he was constantly getting in fist fights, and we had to keep him from doing anything that would make him bleed.
Yep. Yeah, so in the 1970s, there was a breakthrough for this clotting factor medication, which is still essentially the standard of care, although it's rapidly changing because there's new treatments available in hemophilia. Unfortunately, in the 70s and 80s, all of those products were as a result of blood and plasma donations. And when the blood supply was contaminated with hepatitis and HIV, 90% of people with severe hemophilia wound up with one, if not both. And unfortunately, at this point, those who it did not take out right away have most of that generation has since passed.
Right.
So I often tell people, Ryan White, who became a very famous AIDS activist and advocate, he contracted it as a result of his hemophilia. He was diagnosed in December of 1984. I was born in November of 1985, and in fact,
Mm.
I was infected with hepatitis C, but naturally cleared it, which about 20% of people exposed are fortunate to naturally clear it. I was one of those 20%. So I sometimes say I'm about the oldest of the healthy, quote
Mm.
unquote, healthy generation. And yet, actually, if I'm telling a fuller story, I very much so had a foot in the contamination era. I was just one of the lucky ones.
Yeah, isn't it so amazing to me? So when you started talking, I went, okay, there's a sparkle here, and we need to figure out what that is and what we can do together to keep advocating the way that we want to in the world. Because this connection, I haven't thought about my friend. I haven't had anyone ask or the subject be brought up, but it was such a pivotal part of my childhood. And he was born the same year I was, so 1970. And he did pass away in his 40s. And
Which
so,
wasn't uncommon for someone
right.
born at about that time.
Yep, exactly. And so when I heard about it, we hadn't spoken in maybe, 15 years. And when I heard about it, just sort of, I think I was trying to find him on the internet, and I just went, oh my God, so when I heard about you and you were telling me your story on our private call, I went, okay, there's something here. And this is the great thing about, having these connections and being open to opportunity, because what's fantastic is when you're into advocacy, to meet other people that are just as juiced up, pumped up, excited about doing good in the world. You're like, oh, my brethren.
Yes, very much so. Well, it's interesting about that. I have found that whether hemophilia is considered a rare disease. It presents it's primarily male, though not exclusively. So you'll often hear 1 in 5,000 male births. I generally tend to say 1 in 10,000 births just to degenderize it. But either way, rare disease. But in my experience, rare and chronic diseases, there's so much more that we all have in common who are managing either or both of those than there are differences. There's so much more as advocates who have to contend with insurance and access challenges, getting to the right kinds of specialists, dealing with school administrators, HR departments, dating, you name it. There's more that we have in common than we don't. So I think it's very important to, and I'm speaking for myself and in the hemophilia bleeding disorders world, to get out of our bubble a little bit. And we are really strong advocates. The silver lining to that horrific period of time in our recent past is that we developed a really, really strong advocacy core. And so to this day, we have a very strong presence in DC, in federal lobbying and state lobbying. And that's great, but we need to expand and work with other coalitions and other advocates to make sure that we continue to build the number of people who are advocating for their access to healthcare. And with rare disease, I think it's always a bit of a misnomer, because in actuality, 1 in 10 people has a rare disease. So while NORD, National Organization of Rare Disorders, considers a rare disease in the US less than 200,000 people, the totality of people affected by rare diseases is about 10% of America, or over 30 million people. So
Right.
if we can kind of think a little differently about the way we build coalitions, how close can we come as a rare disease population to a 30 million person coalition?
Absolutely. Absolutely. What prompted you to want to align yourself to, the mental health perspective of things and, the mental health arena, I should say, because that isn't considered a rare
No,
by any stretch
as
of
we
the
are learning,
imagination.
quite the opposite. You know, about, let me see now, we're in 2020, so maybe it was November, Thanksgiving-ish time, 2016, I first used the word depression in front of my mother and my then fiance, now wife, and that was very scary to put that word into the air. Even though in my heart I felt as though I'm experiencing things internally that are off, that are wrong, that need to be addressed, I was so hesitant to want to say anything.
Hmm.
And it wasn't even because of stigma associated with mental health or depression as weakness or any of that kind of backward thinking, but I was so sick of being a patient. I was sick of hemophilia. I was sick of, I mean, I've built my life around it, so I'm not a victim in any way, but hemophilia and bleeding disorders is a part of my life all the time, every day. And as this new thing was begging for attention, I didn't want to give it any, because it came under that label of patient once again, and I did not want that. So I spoke with my family about it. I started seeing a therapist. I kind of committed. I kind of stepped out. I kind of went back. And then about a year later, beginning of 2018, is when I started having a sense that maybe I need to do something here as an advocate, as a leader in my community, as a communicator, as someone whose blogs are read and podcasts are listened to, as more and more stories of guys with hemophilia who are taking their own life, or
Hmm.
guys with hemophilia expressing suicidality or hopelessness. Um, and then the icing on the cake for me was I was attending a meeting of about 100 men with hemophilia, just men with hemophilia, no doctors, no pharmaceutical representatives, just men with hemophilia. And the meeting was, I think, about 90 minutes. And the intention of these meetings is to kind of cover a number of topics, what's top of mind and pressing for us adult men. The first topic brought up was depression and suicide, and we never got off of it. And we could have gone
Hmm.
for another however many hours. And I left that meeting shaken. And a couple people actually explicitly called me out to do more, because of the platforms
Wow.
that I have. And I sat with that for a little while longer. And then a basketball player who I very much respect, Kevin Love, wrote a blog. Um, what was it called? I forget the name of it, but what I took from it and what then spurred me to go ahead and start talking was his admitting where his standing and suggesting that we all needed to contribute to an environment where this was okay to talk about.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that I can do. I can't offer solutions. I have none to offer. I can't, I don't want to be, I'm not an expert, I'm not an anybody, but I can contribute to it being a little easier to talk about. So in May of that year, I wrote a blog on my website titled "Okay, I'll Admit It, I'm Depressed,"
Hmm.
and it very quickly made the rounds within our world, and it was clear to me that that was the right thing to do. And since then, I've been asked to participate in very many mental health related initiatives and bleeding disorders. In fact, this year we're actually doing a documentary about hemophilia, von Willebrand disease, and mental health
Fantastic.
that we're going to be screening at the National Hemophilia Foundation's conference this summer for several hundred people in our community.
Fantastic.
So yeah, been an interesting journey.
I bet. I bet. It's I'm not sure why, and it doesn't really matter, but I've always been someone who ends up having uncomfortable conversations. So me part of having an uncomfortable conversation for me too was also always talking about depression or suicidal ideation or early childhood trauma, sexual abuse, all of these things at
Hmm.
times when those topics were profoundly taboo.
Mm.
um
Yeah,
you
it's
know
important. There needs to be voices that are challenging the status quo or speaking to that which is going unsaid. But
yes.
it's risky. I was speaking to a real capital A advocate not too long ago, actually for an interview. I was reviewing his transcripts this morning, and he talked about advocates have to have something to lose. It's not a risk. You're not an advocate if you don't have something to lose. And I thought, that's an interesting point of view. And it's true, though. I mean, to really be the strongest advocate possible, I need to be willing to step up and speak out, even if
Right.
I'm afraid, this blog, I might not get those contracts from
Right.
literally every one of our clients is paying attention to what I do online. That might cost me money. That might cost my company money. I've got 14 employees. What happens if we start losing contracts because Patrick's out there spouting about anxiety and depression?
Right.
Well, Patrick decided that that was more important. And if contracts were going to get lost as a result, come what may. And I suppose that was the risk that made the move an advocacy move.
And you know what? Sometimes those risks, maybe you do lose business, maybe you do lose some things in your life, and you walk through those times, and then all of a sudden you have more business and more of what you enjoy doing than you ever did before because you walked through the fire.
Absolutely. And something that my partner is fond of saying, and I've picked up over the years, play the game the right way and the stats will come. Play the
Exactly.
game the right way and the stats will come. So sometimes playing the game the right way means speaking up and maybe costing yourself in the short run, but keep doing the right thing. The stats will come.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, when I started my podcast, Mental Health News Radio, I was actually told, don't call it mental health.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yeah. And then I was told when I started the network, I was told, oh, I'll be involved in it, but not if you're going to call it mental health. If the term mental health is going to be in the name of the network, you need to call it emotional health or brain health, or just don't call it mental health because there's just too much stigma. It won't take off. And it's so funny because of course, when somebody tells me something like that, I get really ticked.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, well, maybe I'm just going to do it anyway because you told me not to, but which is quite mature, right, of me to be that way.
It's
But
human. It's human.
exactly. But here we are. And now, what is the most popular topic out there by far in many places? Well, the term
Hmm.
mental health. So
That's
I
it.
don't say that as an I told you so, just more of a, okay, you know what, man, do that unpopular thing that even
Yes.
people who are high up in whatever it is they're high up in tell you, don't do that. You're stupid for doing that. My God, do it anyway.
Yeah, it's amazing the amount of resistance that can come. When we first started, so Stop the Bleeding is the name of that web series, the Office-esque web series.
Mhm.
And when we were putting we've done 59 episodes, and this year we're actually doing a feature film on Stop the Bleeding. So it's had quite a journey. But if we go all the way back to the very first episode, when it was being reviewed by the sponsors, they made a point of asking that there's a character in it who dresses up as a ninja and robs a pharmacy. Okay. Well, that was in the script, which was approved, and then we shot it. And when they saw it, they had a big problem with that. And I made clear, well, it's pretty obvious we're not recommending anyone rob a pharmacy. This is a comedy show. We throw water over people. There's a lot of goofy stuff that happens. Um, and they said, okay, well, you have to lose the ninja and all references to the ninja. And kind of like you, I was like, well, I think I'm going to be keeping the ninja and all the references to the ninja. But it wasn't simply out of spite. It was kind of the whole point.
Right.
My position was, we're not reaching young people because we send them flyers, because we talk to their parents, because we say this is important. We send them to camp for 6 days a year, and we think that's enough. It's not. I want to reach them all year round online. But in order to do that, I have to capture their attention. There's a lot of options for what they could watch. So our stuff has to be good. It has to be funny. It has to be moving. So if you're now going to tell me that we got to blunt all the edges on the thing that earlier you recognized, oh, this is going to fill a white space. There's nothing quite like this. And now we're at this stage and you're like, oh, I don't know. There's nothing quite like this. Same story. You just got scared. It's as important and as relevant as it was earlier. Don't get scared now. Don't back away from me now. I've said very close to these very things because I had to. And in the end, we figured out how to make it work. We got the show out there, 9 seasons and a movie later. And frankly, my business was launched with the success of that program. It all was hinged on the ninja.
Right.
So I actually have my company is Believe Limited, but as an independent producer and as a partner in Believe Limited, my business entity is known as Lose the Ninja. So I've taken it to heart as a reminder that you can never lose the ninja.
I love that. Oh, ours was hashtag not changing the name.
There you go. Not changing the name. Yeah. Tell me again. Not going to change it.
Exactly. I don't care. I also had somebody tell me I was my weight goes up and down too much to be able to.
What?
Oh, yes. Yeah, this was a big Oprah Winfrey guest in addiction and eating disorders. Okay. In eating disorders. Okay.
Yeah. Hold on. What did they say to you?
They sat me down and said, you've gained at least 25 pounds or 30 pounds, whatever it was, since I saw you 6 months ago at another conference. So clearly you don't have, this is when I hadn't even started the network yet, but it was an idea that I, was going to move forward with. But they said, so clearly you don't have the health and the ability to take care of yourself enough to take on something of this magnitude.
Ooh, you're getting me angry.
Yeah. And imagine all the things that you go through in your head when somebody does something like that, like immediate flood of shame, just all those things. And, I did
Plus
say
self-conscious. Now I have to think about my weight. On top of everything else, I'm standing in front of you now feeling fat. Thanks.
Yes, exactly. And I did manage to carve together. Well, you know what? Oprah Winfrey has gone up and down with her weight for her entire life and career. And she
on television.
And she happens to be starting a network. This is before OWN really took off, but she was starting it, and she's doing just great. And she also is female, and she also happens to be African-American. So I'm going to go with that as my model and not what you're saying. So it was, and listeners, I'm sorry, because I know you've heard me say that before, but Patrick has it. It was another one of those things where I sat and went, okay. Yeah. I could let this crush me and hit me about weight. Oh my, that is such not anymore, but it has been such an insecurity that just makes me want to eat more. You know what I mean? So, and not take care of myself more. And it has to do with being sexually abused as a child and so much stuff. And a therapist who deals with people that have eating disorders should know this.
I mean, that's unfortunately, I know these kind of stupid things happen, and I hear these kinds of stories, but it really does. It makes me angry on your behalf for something that happened about a decade ago, but I'm still just angry for you.
4 years or 5. No, it was maybe 4 years ago. But what's so cool about it, though, the positive of it, and the reason why I even state it again, is it was one of those moments that I could have been crushed and not gone ahead and done this unpopular thing that I thought someone who's way bigger than I am is telling me this is not going to work. It was the same person that told me not to use mental health as a term too. So So I was forced to go to a very spiritual place and say, this looks awful from this human perspective, but I'm going to go somewhere else with this and use it as fuel to push me forward and push me out of some of the depression that I can struggle with. Because sometimes with depression, you kind of need grist for the mill to get you out of that depression to do stuff. And
Mm,
boy, it lit a firecracker that was bigger, that became a fire that was bigger than the depression and enabled me
mm.
to, do my thing. So anyway, I'm taking over this conversation. I love that you're focusing on mental health. I love that it's something that is mainstream conversation now.
Yeah.
And I love how comfortable people are now talking about something that is not mental illness. Mental health is not mental illness. They are two separate phrases. Neither should be stigmatized.
Oh, that's interesting because how do you differentiate those two? Because I've heard other people use them explicitly interchangeably. So how do you see the difference?
Well, the difference is, if you were speaking to someone about physical health, would you automatically assume that they're talking about physical illness?
Well, that's a good point. No.
Right. So mental health, if you look it up to get a descriptor of it, it doesn't say that it means mental illness. It's your mental health, your mental well-being, your all those things that comprise of what mental health is. Mental illness is a one component of the overarching thing that is mental health, an important component, and we need to watch it and mind it and tend to it, but it isn't, they aren't the same thing. Does that make sense?
Do you see mental illness being more the chronic diagnosable bipolar disorder, schizophrenia? Is that where mental illness feels? Is that the category that you're kind of thinking about?
Yeah, it's where your mental health is challenged in
Yes.
some way or another. That's the mental illness piece. And that could be just generalized anxiety. It could be
Gotcha.
whatever falls under terming something being whatever it is enough to be called an illness.
I gotcha. So for me, I've gotten comfortable owning I have generalized anxiety, I have moderate depressive disorder, and I've come to accept those are forms of mental illness that I
Right.
contend with. So we do agree on the usage. But I'm glad that you brought up it's words matter, and
Yes,
I
they
think
do.
sometimes people in my orbit might get a little tired of my insistence on some word choice and nuance, but I have been in too many experiences now where if we say comprehensive instead of integrated, it's going to be received differently by insurers. If we
Absolutely.
say hemophilia in a DC office that might have tethers to the HIV/AIDS era, we're going to have a different capital in that room than if I keep saying bleeding disorders and in
Yes.
some ways dilute the word that they know to be powerful. So I love words and find it important. So I actually really appreciate that you brought up this conversation.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I also thought, okay, so another way to reduce the stigma, even though, please, let's not have stigma about mental illness either, but a way to reduce the stigma so that people can talk about mental health without being afraid of getting attacked by stigma, would be to know that there is differentiation here. You can do great stuff that really pumps up your mental health without having to go, oh, but I'm talking about illness here.
Yeah, that's a great point too. There's no reason not to improve. There's no
Yeah.
reason for anyone not to improve mental health by utilizing tools
Yep.
and um, getting more beach walks in, sleeping longer hours, working on
Yeah.
nutrition, getting a meditation practice going, journaling, listening to soothing music, whatever it may be. Yeah, you don't have to identify as having a mental illness or being an anxious person or being someone who battles with depression to just use some of these tools to improve your overall quality of life.
Exactly. So let's get rid of barriers to care, right? So barriers to self care. I'm going to use this meditation app or this whatever it is because it's good for my mental health. And I can let go of, because we are careful about language and we promote the differentiation. I'm not going to have anything in the back of my head going, but don't use that app because it means you're mentally ill. You know what I mean? I don't,
Yeah.
it's not even, it's to me, and I know you know this from film, which is so much more detailed than just audio, but how someone perceives something and where that is a gotcha in their subconscious behavior even is such a big deal that I always think I want to make sure that we open this up to everybody. It's why I don't get political on my show, because I don't care where you sit on whatever aisle. Everybody needs to focus on their mental health. If we don't have, you can't be alive and breathing without mental health, whether it's illness or not. That's part, just like you can't be alive and have without brain health.
Right.
You
Like
know,
I don't have heart disease, but I still have to concern myself with my heart
heart
health.
health. Exactly. So,
Yeah, it's one of the interesting. 4 years ago, somebody saying don't name your network mental health, and now today it's one of the buzziest terms and
yep.
just culture. And of course, the Corona COVID period that we're living through has only put a different uh, um, shine on the importance of addressing our mental well-being. I do wonder, as more time goes by, what's on the other side of this. I hate to call it a trend, but there
Right.
is a certain kind of trendiness to awareness around mental health, and
Yes.
it's good, but trends don't last. Substance lasts. So I'm curious to know, when this calms down, what will remain. Maybe we will just live in a country, in a culture where mental health is just more ubiquitously talked about and open and doesn't
Absolutely.
need the same amount of attention in some ways for awareness, because that has happened, and we can just more comfortably talk about it. That would be a really nice result.
That's what I hope for. That right there is exactly what I hope for. You know how it is when you get in a conversation. I used to say this about sexual abuse. I would say, okay, we need to, make it comfortable to talk about. It is so prevalent. We need to get rid of stigma around it. And we don't want to say, we don't want to treat anyone like, oh, those other people over there that have had this happen to them, because it's so
Right.
separating. And I know you know what that is with what you've been tasked with, in your life. So it's another one of those things, a barrier that we want to just shatter, just to have that, go away so that people can just be whoever they are with whatever it is they've experienced and feel safe in the world to get the help they need, to feel included, to not be put in those people over there.
You just used the word included. That reminded me, I had a guest on the Bloodstream podcast, my podcast, not too long ago, an actor named Nick Novicki. Nick is 3'10", so he's a little person. If you are a Sopranos fan or a Boardwalk Empire fan, he's had some good roles on those shows if you look him up. But he and I were talking about this idea of inclusion because he runs a film festival, the Easter Seals Disability Film Festival, I think it's called.
Mhm.
And the idea is not necessarily that disability is the forefront subject of the film, nor does someone with a disability have to be in front of the camera. The idea really is about inclusion. There just needs to be a person with a disability in a meaningful part of the film somewhere, which is more important than simply sticking somebody with a disability in front of the camera so that you can say, look, there he is.
Right. Here's our
And
poster child for
right, that's not.
diversity. Right.
Inclusion is something more embedded and more woven into a larger thing. It's so interesting. So Bombardier Blood is a documentary I directed about the first person with hemophilia to attempt climbing all 7 summits. That's the highest peak on each continent, most notably Mount Everest. And it's a 90-minute film. There's maybe, I don't even know if it's 90 seconds long. It's maybe 60 seconds long, a sequence where we get into the climber's experience with mental health battles and a period where he was angry and drinking too much, and it was challenging his relationship, and he sought help and started to turn that piece of his life around. again, it's 60 seconds. I hear about that part of the film as much as anything else in the film. And it's a reminder to me as a storyteller, we don't always need to put that which feels very important into something in an overblown way for it to carry a lot of weight.
Absolutely.
It's just in there organically, and we don't shy away from it. I think that's probably what people respond to, is that when it comes up, we allow it to be there, and it neither becomes the focus of the film, nor does it take unnecessary amount of time to move past it, nor do we try to trim the edges. We just let it be, and then we move forward. And
Exactly.
people bring it up all the time. And to me, again, that's inclusion. That's just letting it be part of the story without taking over the story. And that's a victory as a storyteller, I think.
Absolutely. And what an art to that. And how many ways I look at, okay, well, here I am, a champion, or have worked hard and tried to be a champion for this thing that I believe in so much. And then I'll look at something like that I've done, and I'll go, yeah, but you're not really a champion over here. You got to work on that, Kristin. So for me, I love the opportunities for me to get really humbled about, yeah, okay, well, you're doing great there, but you got some growth to do over here, girlfriend.
And that's true. And what's also true is none of us can ever grow in all the ways needed to accomplish
Exactly.
everything we're interested in. So part of it's growth and part of it's partnership. I
Mm,
have done everything I've done well in partnership. I
yeah.
came from a theater background. I was in theater because I couldn't be in sports. All I wanted to do was be part of a team. And with hemophilia, that wasn't
Ah,
available to me. And then
yeah.
theater, that was what theater's a team sport. So I've carried that through, and that's the only reason I know how to make podcasts, make films, produce theatrical events and fundraisers and whatever else I do. None of it is done by myself. It's all done as a team. Though to your point, I have had to and will have to continue to grow in order to make sure that I'm carrying my own weight as our portfolio and our responsibilities, more importantly, expand.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And, to give yourself a break when you do have those times, it may be a moment of time. It may be, a year or longer. It could be 2 weeks, whatever it is, those times when we struggle. We're on the struggle side. We're struggling with our mental health for some
Hmm.
reason or another. Maybe it's a past trauma that's coming up now because something showed up to really help you deal with it, or it's whatever it is. What I love about this work is, the ability to understand what this is, and also, and then be that allows you to give grace to everyone for, and really think about how someone's feeling, what's going on with them. Maybe you don't necessarily like their behavior, but you don't know what's underneath it and why they're behaving that way. So to be very compassionate as you can be to yourself and to someone else, because you literally don't know often what's driving a behavior.
No, usually not if you're not intimately associated with somebody. And then sometimes even still don't necessarily know what's driving that behavior. Sometimes I don't know what's driving my behavior. I, at the end of 2018, I mentioned I started to take my mental health a little bit more seriously after, or excuse me, at the beginning of 2018. Well, at the end of 2018, I had what I thought at the time, at the time I just thought I was dying. As it turns out, I was having a panic attack. And as it turns out, it wasn't my first, but it was the most prominent, and it was the textbook. Again, I came to appreciate that after the fact. In the moment, I thought, oh, this is it. This is how I go. All right, well, the first thing I actually did was I went to my refrigerator and I took out my hemophilia medication, and I immediately took it because I thought, if I'm about to get taken out, I'm at least not letting the story be this guy didn't have his medication in his body. After all the advocating I did, if I'm getting taken out, my meds are going to be in my body at the time. But I called my wife, and I was at work, and I called her and just said, I need you to come home. And we had dinner plans with people. I need you to cancel those and come home. And the only thing I could bring myself to say for the rest of that day was, I just need everything to stop. I just need everything to stop. I felt like I didn't have any answers. I didn't even
Right.
know what the questions were. I just knew that whatever was going on had brought me to a place where whatever just happened in my body, which only days later, uh, a second psychiatrist called a panic attack. And then I was like, I really should think about this panic attack thing. But I knew whatever just happened in my body was not worth it. Whatever is causing this has to stop. And I don't know what it is, but it just all has to stop until I can figure it out. And I went into an intensive outpatient program at the beginning of last year for 2 months and spent a lot of time on figuring out what's going on.
What a gift you gave yourself by doing that. My God, good for you.
And it really, it's been, I've been saying this a lot recently. I guess I've reached a kind of another milestone in my health journey. When I think about how lost I felt at the end of 2018, and it's not even 18 months later, which big picture, not a long time. And I have so much more information. I have such a better understanding of myself, what's going on, why it's going on, what I can do about it, what I can't do about it, what's going to take time, what I can change today. I have answers now. And I suppose as I say this, and I'm conscious of listeners, it took me a really long time to say the word depression, and then it took even longer to do something about it. I don't have regrets about that. My journey's mine, and I'm happy to be where I am now. But all the hesitation that I had around using the word depression, and the hesitation I had around committing to therapy and committing to identifying as somebody who, maybe I do have anxiety and depression. I wish I let that in a little earlier. It just would have made for peace sooner. And as you've come to learn from your work, so many people now can benefit from the fact that I can talk about this stuff and I have the platforms to do it. So it's not only helped my life, but I've been able to offer my experience to other people to take or leave, and to my company. I told my company in an in-person meeting at the beginning of last year, I said, here's what's going on. This is why I'm not going to be around as much these next 2 months. I want you to know that, so that there's not just kind of whispers about where's Patrick. And I also want you to know you work someplace where if you're at a period of your life where you have to address something in your health, that this is a safe space to bring that up, and no one's going to hold that against you. And I think that was a really important moment too for my company and for my growth as a CEO and as a leader and a colleague. So yeah, I would just encourage anyone who has a suspicion that there's something they need to address. Maybe that's why they're listening to this podcast. Address it. It's not as scary as you think once you actually start to take the steps. And there are so many other people who have taken those steps and will be there for you. There's plenty of us who are coping with anxiety, depression, trauma, PTSD, abuse history. Unfortunately, this is not uncommon. Fortunately, there is a community.
And boy, do you know how to close the show. You are a seasoned professional, man. I didn't even have to prompt you. That's what I could tell. I'm dealing with someone who also is a host.
Hey, there's a thing to this rhythm.
There is. Totally. Well, tell my listeners where they can find out more information about you and your organizations that you're involved in.
Happily. So bloodstreammedia.com is our podcast network. The Bloodstream podcast, which is available everywhere you find podcasts, is my podcast that I co-host with my wife, Natalie. And if you want to get a bigger picture of what Believe Limited does in film, on the web, and elsewhere, you can go to believeltd.com. Larry, Tom, David, believeltd.com, or look me up, Patrick James Lynch. I'm on all the social media platforms.
Fantastic. Patrick, it's been a distinct pleasure.
Kristin, likewise, and thank you.
And listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Mental Health News Radio. Hi, listeners. I'll make it quick. These are some really cool places that give discounts and other cool things for listeners of Mental Health News Radio Network. If you want to get amazing help with healing from narcissistic abuse, go to healfromanarcissist.com. If you want CBD products that are the best of the best, I use them myself, go to Proze, PROZE.com, and use the code mentalhealth20, mentalhealth20. If you want to get daily perk ups that help retrain your brain to think more positively, go to perkupdaily.com. And also,
just because this one's fun. snarkycandles.com. I guarantee you'll love them. Snarky with a Y, SNARKY, candles.com. And don't forget, if you want to hear all the shows on the network about first responders, you can go to firstrespondermentalhealthnetwork.com, and all of our shows that focus on narcissistic abuse, narcissisticabusehealingnetwork.com. Thanks for listening, and back to the show.
Sometimes I'm passive aggressive, but never without good intentions. I heat up and act on my emotions.
Thanks so much for listening to Mental Health News Radio. Our podcast can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, and hundreds of other podcast apps, or you can visit our website at mentalhealthnewsradio.com. If you have a question or would like to be a guest, become a podcaster on our network, or join the amazing organizations that help keep us on the air, please email us at info@mhnrnetwork.com. Get ready for that special goodbye from our resident therapy dog, Miles, and a special thanks to Emily Sohn for letting us use her incredible song, Cordial, for our podcast music. Listen to the full song on SoundCloud at emily.sonne.
Don't be surprised when I don't hate on you. After all, we promised we'd be cordial. Sometimes in you I can fight it, but I'm opposing.
Good boy.